Barnes. I'm one of the founding members of Decoding Dyslexia, and we just celebrated our 10th year of starting the group about a couple days ago on the 18th. So it's a really fun experience to be a part of this. And my partner in crime here is Lori Marabella. She has been very active with Decoding Dyslexia for a number of years as well. And for those who might have reached out to us via our Facebook page, messaging, or through our emails, Lori is typically the main person you interact with. So you may actually have already chatted with her and you didn't know, so now you have the face to the emails. So just to give a quick background, so I have 2 kids, and my youngest is the one that's dyslexic, along with several other learning disabilities, and she is now a sophomore in college. Lori, you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. What brought me to dyslexia advocacy is my son, who just turned 17 and is a junior in high school. So he has the added pleasure of attention deficit. So frequent co-traveler with dyslexia that happens quite often. So that always adds another layer to what you have to think about for school and the impact of that on the education. So that's what brings me to Decoding Dyslexia.
Actually, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So a lot of those, and so often, as everybody will know, and when, we started Decoding Dyslexia, and as we've continued, it doesn't really matter where you live. A lot of the stories are still the same. A lot of the experiences are the same. And that's really what kind of binds us all together, that, we say it doesn't really matter how old your child is, it's where you are in the journey. And often, a kid in 6th grade and somebody and a child in 1st grade, the families may have similar experiences if they both recently got a diagnosis, and they're both starting the journey. So there's a lot depends on kind of where you are. In order to try to streamline our presentation, since we could probably talk about this every day for a week, but we're coming in with the assumption that if you're attending tonight, your child already has an IEP, or at least you're very knowledgeable IEPs, or you're just trying to figure it out. But we're not going to get into how to request an IEP, how to start the process, because that's could be a workshop in and itself. So this is assuming you have an IEP. Maybe it's the first year the IEP is taking effect, or maybe you're a seasoned parent of the IEP world, and you're just trying to make sure you're doing all that you should be doing and can be doing to maximize that your child's IEP is followed correctly. So I'm going to go through just some overviews just to remind people, what IEPs are and the laws that govern those, and then we'll get into a little bit more depth of what you need to be looking for and how to monitor your IEP so that it serves your child's needs and purposes. So let's see, here we go. I thought that was going to, no. All right, so, I missed my agenda. Hold on a minute. Okay, I seem to go back. All right. Okay, so first we're going to go through just to remind people, of those that are seeking services for their kids. There are 3 main ways that you can get those services. There are federal laws and there are state laws that impact special education. There's the special education process. So sometimes you need to be reminded of where those are, along with your procedural safeguards that are built into the IDEA law. And then, into, how you can advocate for your child. Some parent tips, from our experiences, from things that people have shared with us, and then some online resources that you might be wanting to tap into. The online resource page we can send to you with so you'll have direct links if you want. We can email that to you as a PDF, and our email address is info@decodingdyslexia.org. Decoding-Dyslexia-NJ.org. So that is an email that both Lori and I monitor. So you'll get either one of us if you use that email. Alrighty. So I am curious, maybe you can put in the chat here, and Lori's going to be kind of watching it since I'll be doing most of the talking, to find out how many of you have existing IEPs, and how long has your child had an IEP? Just kind of get a feel for who's attending and what kind of background you have. Alrighty. So if your child needs services, it's usually going to happen in one of three ways. They're going to be the response to intervention, or RTI. You may have heard those acronyms. The education world loves their abbreviations. And then, of course, your IEP, which is the individualized education plan, and the Section 504 plan, which falls under the Americans with Disability Act. I'm not going to be talking about the 504 plan because you don't have an IEP with a 504 plan. Again, that's a whole different conversation. Not all dyslexic children have to be served in special education. There are ones that that don't have as severe needs, so therefore they could do really well in school with a 504 plan that gives them the accommodations that they need to be successful, to make sure they can access grade level content. All right, so response to intervention, and we have, so there are three tiers. You've got your, the 504 covers tiers 1 and 2, and then you have to go into special services to get into tier 3. So your child may be through one of these, and even before you get to the IEP, it's very likely, the school is going to try to work your child through the different tiers to see if there are traditional ways of helping a child will work before they need to go into that individual program. The challenge, of course, is whether or not your child gets kind of stuck on one of the tiers before the school thinks they're ready to move on, or they want to try something else. And that's where a lot of the advocacy has to come in, to start asking questions, start asking for progress monitoring and such, so that you can see if there's progress made or not, and don't find out in May when you're at the end of towards the end of the year that your child didn't make progress as expected. Okay, so there are federal laws that impact the IDEA, which is the governing law where IEPs come from. As I mentioned before, the other one is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So we're mainly going to be talking about the IDEA law. All right, so just to remind you, because I'm sure a lot of the people, you don't really go back and read the laws, and thinking about reading the laws in the book feels a little intimidating, because it just sounds like might be language or information that maybe it's not something you want to you can understand or that you want to deal with. But it actually, the language in the IDEA law is actually really good, and if it was followed to the letter of the law, we would probably have a lot less issues than we often run into. But just so you remember that what Congress planned to do with this law is they wanted to make sure children that have disabilities have a free and appropriate education plan, and a free and appropriate education. And so that they want to emphasize that special education and related services, which is your speech therapy, OT, PT, things like that, are designed to meet their unique needs and help them further education and employment and independent living, which ultimately is why our kids are going through school, to become independent, successful adults. So the IDEA is supposed to meet the child's disability, and you hear FAPE, which is the acronym of free and appropriate public education. Yeah, okay. And another terminology is the least restricted environment, or LRE. These are terms that are often thrown around, especially in IEP meetings. If you don't know what an abbreviation stands for, you do need to stop the meeting for a moment and just ask, for them to just explain what that is. There are lists of what some of the abbreviations are, and I meant to pull one of those out. So I don't know if Lori knows any kind of existing listing. Otherwise, it's something that we can provide to you later with if you email us, because I do have something on my computer that kind of gives a nice sort of glossary of the abbreviations. All right, so FAPE. FAPE is really the thing that that holds the IEP together, because the IEP is supposed to deliver FAPE for a special education student, and they are provided at the public expense, and they're supposed to be supervised, and they have to meet state education standards, and as well as the child's IEP, is what that child needs as an individual in order to have FAPE relate to them, to apply to them. So often you'll hear the least restrictive environment, and there are different levels. So if you look at the flow chart here, it shows kind of to what extent the LRE can apply. So it's the general education, it's general education with special education support, it's resource centers and related services. There's and I'm not going to say the read is due, but you won't go into special education classes with some inclusion, and then there's private schools or residential programs and so forth. Usually your kids with dyslexia and other learning disabilities, don't need to go into the residential homes, and the hospital schools and so forth. Those are usually, those are meant for different kinds of disabilities. There are, of course, people with kids with learning disabilities, and might have other disabilities that will kind of overlap some of the categories.
Liz, can you go back one slide? I just wanted to add a point about those different settings.
Oh, there we go. Okay, go ahead.
There we go. Special education, it's really important that people understand that special education is a service. It is not a place. That the names of these types of settings that you see and get listed on your IEP, that these are settings where the services will be delivered. So when we talk about least restrictive environment, that too is not really a physical place. That the environment is, are you, again, always coming back to that appropriate education. So if a child needs a structured literacy program, where can that be delivered? That can it be delivered through a special education teacher in a general education classroom? Does the child need a pull-out setting with a smaller group so that the child can focus on that specialized instruction? So those are some things to consider when we talk about special education services versus being a place, and what makes up that environment. So it's the least restrictive environment where the services can be delivered.
Excellent, good point. Thank you for that. All right, so this is where sometimes it gets, parents get a little confused about the, who qualifies and the categories. And, and loosely we will talk, people will say, oh, my child's been classified, but they didn't classify them as dyslexia. Well, dyslexia is not one of the categories. Dyslexia is a characteristic in one of the categories. So in order to be eligible for IDEA services, special education services, the student must have a disability that adversely affects his or her educational performance and must need special education in order to receive an appropriate education. So that's, a big part that, that really can make a difference as whether or not your child gets placed into education or not. So these are the criteria. Your child has to fit into one of these categories. And so typically for dyslexia is the specific learning disability. And in there that does, it lists dyslexia as one of the characteristics that might fall under specific learning disability, along with dysgraphia, which is a handwriting, handwriting is not just handwriting, it's not the physical handwriting, it's that in addition to the ability of doing written expression. That's what I was trying to say. You've got your math disabilities and such will fit into that. Sometimes if you have a speech issue, you have ADHD, you have a few other learning challenges that the child is dealing with, the child may have to have more than one, may fit into more than one category. So if they just fits under the specific learning disability, that's going to be your category. If you have ADHD, they might give the other health impaired because that accounts for the ADHD, and they would include your well, usually that's ADHD, and then they may also say other health impaired, and they might say in addition specific learning disability. If you have multiple disabilities, then there's the multiply disabled is often another a category that kids with dyslexia might be characterized as. And my daughter, when she was in K through 12 school, she was categorized as that because she has ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. So because of those multiple disabilities, it gets a broader category. So the specific learning disability is the one those of us in the dyslexia world, deal with the most. And and I'll just read the definition because this is what's in the law. And sometimes, the school districts may define it a little differently, but this is what governs the IEP and the IDEA law. Specific learning disability means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using language, spoken or written, which disorder may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, and do mathematical calculations. Disorders included, such term includes the conditions as the perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimum brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. So when years ago, I don't know if it's as prevalent now as it was when my daughter was younger, school districts would often say that dyslexia, it doesn't have its own category, and it doesn't have its own category, but it is under specific learning disability. So you can talk and use the word dyslexia. They can't categorize, they can't make the child eligible for the IEP as the category of dyslexia, because that in itself does not exist. But they can use the word dyslexia, in the IEP, in conversations, in your child study team meetings. And often, sometimes that becomes a challenging conversation. But legally, they're allowed to. And there is a guidance letter, which I will point out at the end of the presentation, that the federal Department of Education put out to all school districts saying it is okay to say dyslexia, and more details on that. So I will show you that later. So as I mentioned, the other health impaired will cover things like ADHD. A lot of our kids, do have ADHD along with the dyslexia.
Liz, can you go back one slide? I just want to highlight one thing within the definition of specific learning disability, and that's where you see processes involved in understanding or using language. That reading is a language function. And when I learned that, it kind of made a lot of things clear, that what you may see with your kids are difficulties, as we see here again, in the definition, that the difficulty in speaking, reading, writing, spelling, all of that crosses the boundaries of the language parts of the brain. And it's all very much related, that when we say dyslexia, we tend to think of just the reading, that a child has trouble breaking that alphabetic code and learning the sounds of letters. But that's why the spelling is so hard, that the reading is hard, the spelling is hard. And when we're not reading or spelling very well or easily, that makes writing hard. Often you'll find kids also have a rapid naming deficit. That should be a good part of any comprehensive evaluation, is not just the reading functions, but is there a delay in response to what should be automatic for kids, whether it's reciting numbers or colors. These are often part of those types of assessments. So when a child doesn't do well on that rapid automatized naming, that we know that sometimes impairs further that language function. So a student might benefit from having additional time to respond, that what we refer to as processing speed. So those kids can have accommodations within the IEP.
Exactly. And of course, reading does not end, when the language arts part of their day is over. They have to read in all subjects. And so the disability, it can affect, everywhere, including math, reading math problems. And often some of that won't pop up, of course, until they get a little bit older and their math, skills and so forth will be, a higher demand, which involve a lot more reading. So that's, one of those things that parents have to just stay vigilant on. Okay. So in using special education, there's specifically designed instruction. And, and that means, that again, no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. And, the challenge with that is, often your school district may let you know that they don't have, the type of reading programs that would work for a child with dyslexia in the school building that they attend, but they do have it in the school district at maybe a different school. So it's a logistic issue for them, but that's not it's not an excuse for not being able to provide, specifically designed instruction for the child. So there's a lot of times, that is one of the things that, parents need to be aware that they can request that the child get what they need, and we'll get into like naming of methodologies and so forth later. But this is defined in the law. So they are protected under the law to get specifically designed instruction and get it, in the environments where they are. And too often, too often we do hear, stories of kids that it seems like the school wants them to fail before they actually will show that there's a need. And that is certainly not the case. Your child does not have to just bottom out with, the response to intervention programs and such that they're trying on your child, and they're not designed for kids with dyslexia. So they keep not making a progress and they keep failing and falling further behind. There's nothing that says that you have to be X number of years behind before you can get services. There is a challenge with the term, oh gosh, I'm blanking out. Oh, Lori, help me there. The gap,
a severe discrepancy.
Thank you. Severe discrepancy. There, in the IDEA law, it does say that one of the criteria that you can use in qualifying a child, can be a severe discrepancy model. It means their IQ is at one level and their performance, their reading levels is a lower level, but it has to be a certain percentage to be considered severe enough to warrant getting special education services. And the IDEA law says that's one of the eligibility criteria that a school district can consider, but it can't be the only one they consider. And unfortunately, that does happen more times than not. And it really is a disservice to the child. Anything you want to add on that, Lori?
Yeah, that most districts in New Jersey do use the severe discrepancy model. Most tend to make that discrepancy 22 points. A standard deviation is often on these assessments 15 points. So a 1.5 standard deviations comes to 22 points. And as Liz was saying, it's really a disservice to our kids for reading, because when they start formal education, that one first grader looks a lot like the next first grader because they haven't had formalized schooling yet. So often there won't be that severe discrepancy to qualify because kids haven't spent enough time in school. And particularly if they're bright, they come from homes with lots of books, parents who read to them and take them to places, and they have a lot of background knowledge that makes up for their inability to read what is on the page. So unfortunately, that leads to a delayed identification for kids until they're really struggling until third, maybe fourth grade, that they really start to lose it. When the reading demands become that much greater, that there's a saying that you go from learning to read to reading to learn. So that third, fourth grade really is a turning point for kids where they hit that wall and can no longer manage with the reading skills that they have.
Exactly. And, one of the things to consider, especially for, being in New Jersey, we do have dyslexia laws that were passed in and took effect in 2013 and 2014. And the screening law, the way that is specified is the child only needs to be identified with one at-risk indicator of possible reading disability or reading difficulties like dyslexia. And the parent can raise that flag. You do not have to wait for the school or a teacher to wave the flag and say, hey, my child is doing X. And in the law, it does list, the state law, it does list several indicators, but it is not the exhaustive list. In fact, when the law was being worked on and going through the legislative system, that was one thing that we as Decoding Dyslexia really tried to jump in on, because they had listed indicators that were more in line with somebody that might be in third grade. And we wanted to make sure, it was spelled out that you could be picking this up in preschool and kindergarten. So we requested, and they agreed to add a longer list, but also naming that it is not the exhausted list. And so that's really important. And the other piece of that screening law, which did not quite go the way we wanted, it was originally, it was supposed to be a kindergarten screening, but unfortunately it got revised and amended during the process. And so the end of it is that the law will apply if an indicator is flagged before the child is at the end of the first half of second grade. So essentially of a 4 marking period school year, by the end of the second marking period of a second grader is when the window starts closing or closes for that. If you're transferring into the district, there's a different age group on that, which escapes me at the moment. But from the kindergarten, first grade, in the beginning of second grade, parents absolutely have the ability to say, hey, my child cannot, say their letters. My child cannot read, anything, or or my child has speech issues, which is affecting their ability to articulate letters, which is then affecting their ability to read. We have a checklist that breaks it down for kids by different age groups. as to typically what indicators you should be looking for. So any one of those are ones that a parent can say, hey, we need to take a look here. And then if they show an indicator, then the child is supposed to be screened. And if the screener shows that the child is at risk, then they have to have a full comprehensive evaluation. And if the evaluation again, indicates the child indeed does have a learning disability in dyslexia and reading disabilities, then they have to be provided evidence-based reading and direct reading instructions. So that's what the law reads. It does not always get followed that way, but that's the way it reads. And so being very knowledgeable of the law and being in the way the process is supposed to work is really important. And as they always say, knowledge is power. So we do recommend that you try to make yourself as familiar with the state law and the federal laws as possible. So methodology, that's always a sticking point in a lot of this journey with dyslexia. There's a lot of research that shows, that structural literacy, explicit structural literacy with a phonics base is really what children with dyslexia need in order to learn to read properly and successfully. In the IDEA, they can't necessarily, you can't get the school district to say, I want my child to be given the Wilson reading system and have that be listed under the methodology. However, in the present level section of the IEP, which describes presently what the child is doing and what they're doing it with, that is a perfectly acceptable place to specify your child is working with, again, I'll use Wilson, working with Wilson, and how is that child doing with Wilson? Or if the child isn't being given Wilson, they're giving some other program that's maybe through the response to intervention, some of the RTI tiers, and they're not making any progress on that, then the parent certainly can say, then we need to do something different. But if you don't specify what the child is using and how it's working, then it's really hard to design the rest of the IEP, because the present level section then drives the rest of the IEP and the goals and the objectives and so forth. So it's very often the school districts may tell you that it's not their policy to list methodologies, but that could be their preference, but the law doesn't say that. The federal law does not say that. So, the parent concern sections and the present level section is definitely an area where that can be included in something that the parents can request and as I like to say, be politely persistent to try to make sure that happens. And we can go into more of that a little bit later. So this kind of reviews some of that, is that you don't have the right to select the preferred methodology or who's going to give it. You can't, the school can choose the methodologies, but the parents absolutely can demand a methodology that works. So if they're not making progress with the programs that they're using, then they can call for an IEP, a new meeting, and say, we need to revisit the program and try something different. Okay, so the special education process. So if you have an IEP, you have gone through this, you have done the identification, you've gone through the evaluation, your child was determined to be eligible, you start developing an IEP, and then you're into the implementation of the IEP and the progress in the monitoring of the IEP, and of course, then there's the annual review. So we're just going to take a look at steps 5 and 6 for this workshop, because that's kind of where you're going to live and breathe right now if you already have your IEP.
Liz, we did get a couple answers to your question
Yes.
about where people are coming from. That we have an attendee who is new with an IEP that just started in September. And we have somebody who has had an IEP for a couple of years, but the dyslexia diagnosis is new.
Okay. All right. Very good. Appreciate that. So yeah. So you're going to, depending on where you are. So especially if you're new, you can really set yourself up well into using some of the best practices that we're going to be talking about, and kind of keep you in time with the process. Too often parents are not as well informed, and then they get surprised later when things aren't working, and then there's a lot of catch up going on, and that's where things get a lot more stressful and contentious. So trying to stay involved and staying being truly proactive in what you do and being organized makes a huge difference in being successful. So one of the things you can do, and that part of starting off the school year, is you want to make sure that you have a copy of the IEP. Depending on the age, is you can go into more detail with your child as to how the IEP is going to help them and what to expect, especially as the kids get older. They could be more aware of what kind of accommodations, modifications, what kind of programs they're supposed to have, because sometimes then as they get older, they're the ones that can let you know if things are working or they're getting what they're supposed to be getting. And you want to make sure each teacher that the child interacts, because the IEP applies to all teachers the whole school day. It's not just their language arts class. It's all day, because even in health class, sometimes you have to read things, sometimes you have to write things. So the IEP would still apply to that. Progress monitoring is huge. And sometimes the parents, I think, feel like they just have to wait until they're, given the information. But you can ask for it. You can set up, in the beginning of the school year, you can reach out to the teachers and say, how are you going to be monitoring my child's progress with her reading? And, what kind of reports can I expect to receive? When can I receive them? Ideally, you want to get, they should be monitoring the progress every 2 weeks. Doesn't always happen that way, but that's the ideal. But definitely you want to, keep checking. You don't want to wait till just to the end of the marking period to see how things played out. You want to check in several times through that marking period to make sure the child is making progress and that they're keeping records, they have charts, and so forth. Here's an example of some progress monitoring chart. They've got the dotted line. That's what they're, what they're doing and what they're hoping to do. Oops, hello. Through the course of the year, trying to reach this goal. And and here's where they started. So your intervention data points, this is where you want to check in. So where are we in the line? And if they're doing, monitoring correctly, then they should be making little notations at different time periods, so you can see if they're making progress, if they're sort of, stale, getting a little, plateaued, or if they're going to be getting, making some good progress. The structural, procedural safeguards, I'm not going to get into a lot of it, but because if you have an IEP, you have protections, and you have rights, and you should have received the parents' rights in special education if you're here in New Jersey, which is also called the PRIZE booklet. You want to make sure you have that. You can go on the Department of Ed in New Jersey and get a digital version if you can't find yours, but you want to be well familiar and with that, and make sure you know what your options are. Again, these are the safeguards should you have disagreements, and they're things that you can do, and goes into you can have mediations and due process, and we're hoping that you don't end up there. But the best way to do this is you need to be organized, and this really goes into starting at the beginning of the school year. Like I said, reach out, send emails to all of your child's teachers, make sure they have, give them a copy of the IEP, maybe go over how you feel the IEP might directly relate to that class. I mean, if it's like a related arts class or something, instead of just the core academics. When it's time for your IEP meetings, you make sure you have the information you need in advance. If there were any kind of evaluations, testing or something, you want to get those that information, the reports on that in the beginning. But communications is really key. You really want to be part of the team. You are part of the team, and you want to be positive, you want to be proactive, you want to make sure the teachers know that you want them to be working together for your child's success. You don't want to set up, an adversary type of situation. And as we said, knowledge is power. Read your IEP several times throughout the year. Make sure you know what's in there. Look up and do some of your own research and get books on the challenges your child has, so you're more familiar with what those are and what they're supposed to look like. So, on the organization, I said binders. Binders are really, really important. I think understood.org used to have a video about how to organizing a binder. In fact, if you just Google that, you can find a lot of different videos and such that people have done on that have been really, really helpful in how to be organized and save everything. If it wasn't written down, it didn't actually happen is a lot of the rule of thumb. And then, like I said, so in prepping for your IEP meetings, in the beginning of the school year, if things aren't quite going the way it's supposed to, then you can request an IEP. You don't have a meeting. You don't have to wait until the end of the year. You don't have to wait to the end of the semester or end of the marking period. If there's some concerns and you're seeing things playing out at home are of that needs to be addressed, then you can call for an IEP meeting, or you can try to email with some of the IEP team. But you don't, a lot of things, a big part of it is don't wait until it's really gone, too far south before you address it. And we're talking about communication. There is a good article here, and I'll click on that in a moment, from Wright's Law about preparing for IEP meetings and some best practices for that. When you have if you have a verbal conversation with a teacher on the phone or in person, then send an email to follow up and just say, it was great meeting with you, and just to recap what we talked about and what we agreed to, and then spell it out. So now it's documented. Now it's got a timestamp, and you spelled out what you agreed to. And if there's any discrepancy with what they remember, then they have the opportunity to correct what you said or add to that. And again, it's you be very professional, you be very polite, but you need to be detailed. We're talking about the knowledge base, so understand the diagnosis. Read books, articles. Our Decoding Dyslexia New Jersey page, we post a lot of different articles and resources so that you can educate yourself. And that's a big part of advocating for your child, to know what they need. And building partnerships. I said you really don't want to end up in an illegal situation with your school district if you don't have to. And the best way on doing that is to make sure they know that you want to be part of the team, and that you want them to be part of the team. It's got to work together. It's sometimes, when my daughter was younger, she had additional speech language therapy outside of school as well as she was getting inside of school. And I had the two therapists talk to each other, so they were working on the same type of things at the same time, so that my kid wasn't, kind of getting pulled in many directions. And everybody was happy with that, because they wanted to help my daughter, but they liked working together rather than feeling like they were, kind of competing with each other. And I think you'll find oftentimes there is more of that, reception to work together like that. All right, and so these are just some images of resources that you can find. Find what the kind of program that your child may be using if they're not getting one of the structured literacy programs that are recommended. And you might be given information like your child in a certain Lexile number, or there are certain letter for the type of books that they're reading, and you may not know what that is. Well, there are charts like this all over the internet, and again, I can we can send these to you if you're interested, and that way you can kind of see what it is that they're saying, where that child's supposed to be if they're at that level, what grade level that's equivalent to. The Reading League organization has a really nice PDF that goes into how to evaluate, the reading program your child's getting, and is it meeting the needs of your dyslexic child. And this is a new document that came out this fall. We had it on our Facebook page last week or so, I think, and it has really, really good information. And this is being sent out to the school districts, so you should have a look at it too. We have a New Jersey Handbook. We have great charts in the handbook to be able to guide you through what to ask. And this is the guidance letter that says it's okay to say dyslexia that I was mentioning before. And let's see, I think I'm going to leave that there. We're going to take some questions. You can read, these are just tips from some parents that I got off of, we posted a question to our Facebook page, and these are some great tips that were provided. So I'll let you read those. Lori, what kind of questions do we have?
We don't have any yet.
Oh, there you go. No questions. Anybody have any tips that has worked for them, especially like the one parent that mentioned, they've had IEPs for a number of years. If you found things that helped you navigate the year better in the beginning of the year by doing some things, any comments on that? Well, then we'll see if somebody chimes in. But so, as some of the tips, referred to some of the things I mentioned before about emailing everybody and such. One of the tips that somebody had said, get a baseline data at the beginning of the school year that shows where your child is starting from in terms of the reading level and fluency. And then you want to, that's when you're going to ask, how frequently are you going to be getting data and following up on their progress? But having where they started and is really important, because then you can gauge the progress that you're making. Lori, do you have any particular tips that you have employed with your kids?
I would just say that point about the present levels section is so important, that you get your initial evaluation, you get your triennial reevaluation 3 years later to see if your child is still eligible for special education. You can request that sooner, by the way. 1 year has to pass, that you can't request it any sooner than 1 year, but you could certainly request it at 18 months or 2 years if your child is changing schools, for instance, and you'd like your child to be reevaluated by a team that perhaps he or she is more familiar with before they make that move. And the present level section is just, it's really the key for everything that comes after it, as Liz said earlier, that's where your needs would be identified. If you are having any private testing done, that would be a good place to have that recorded. Your team may give you a hard time about that, but that is data, that it is a present level of academic function and performance. So that is absolutely where that data belongs. That you may hear your team telling you that we do data-driven decision-making. So again, be aware of all those sources of data that you have, whether it comes from private therapies or evaluations. A lot of schools are implementing computer-based programs. So IXL, iReady, MAP testing. So those results are typically either sent to you directly, or they live within your student information system on your district website. So all of that data should be captured. And again, the goals should be based on what those needs are. That the saying is, needs drive goals, drive services. So it shouldn't be, this is the service we have, and we're going to make your child fit into it. Again, it's about the unique needs of the child. So once the needs are identified, then we can develop the goals. So how are we going to meet those needs? And then the goals determine the services to come. Okay, and Liz, I see we have a question about not receiving any progress reports or a baseline from any of the teachers in the reading program. The district would not talk about what program they are using. What should I be asking to help facilitate more transparent information and progress tracking?
Well, a lot of it is, the law allows you, to be a part of the team. And if you're part of the child study team, then you are entitled to receive the same information that they're getting, because they're making decisions on your child and you are supposed to be a part of that decision making. They may not like, to provide the records to you, but you are allowed to have access to their records. And you might need to formally request the records, say, I want to have all copies of all the data, all the progress monitoring assessments that have been done on my child, from either the start of this school year, or you can go back as long as they've been in district too, but you might want to start, because most school districts will do some sort of a baseline when they get started. So I would be very surprised if they did nothing. So it is probably there. And so you need to, but yes, you need to request it. And you can say, according, to the IDEA law, I'm entitled to get this information. And, so often they'll tell you policy, it's not their policy to do this or that. And policies are fine, but policies are not law. And that's where, there was a circumstance of a family I know that, the parent wanted to describe the type of program in the present level section, or PLAF section. PLAF is often it's called. And they said, well, that's not our policy. And the parent said, well, it may not be your policy, but there's nothing in the IDEA law that says that we can't include the methodology. And they started doing some backpedaling, and they put it in the present level section. So they are, a lot of times, you said you're working with the school district, but they need to know that you understand the laws too, and that you need to let the laws work for you. Is that helpful? So as we finish up here, and let me know if you have any other questions there, Lori. So, sort of the final words, remember, it's the fair, free and appropriate education plan. As we say, it's not the Cadillac, it's the Chevrolet programs that you're entitled to. Put everything in writing. He said, if it's not in writing, they can say it was never said. Definitely keep your binders, keep your records, print out copies of emails if there's any really important thing on there, or save them as a PDF so you can put them in a file, because sometimes it's hard to find emails later. But and you've got to be willing to work with them, and you've got to be respectful, and you've got to be pleasant and professional, and because you're expecting that of them, they should be able to expect that of you. You are a voice at the table, and everything that they do at the IEP meeting should be child focused. You're there because of your child. You're not there because of policies and so forth. And so you need to make sure that even though if you don't agree, that you still have to come up with a compromise, because your child still needs to have the education that the child is entitled to. So we did those questions, and then I was just going to show you some of those links. So on our Decoding Dyslexia website, our resource page, we have links to the handbook, to the Department of Ed. They have a resource page on their website. They have a special education page on their website. So for instance, so this is the handbook. I would strongly suggest you print a copy of the handbook and bring it with you. There are some really good charts like this that you can use. Their checklists about is the program that's being offered a structured literacy program, and it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, let's go through the program, the reading program you're giving my child. Which of these boxes can we check off that this program satisfies? So the handbook is really critical here in New Jersey, and a lot of other states have one as well. If you happen to be from another state, you might want to check to see if you have one. This is the special education code, the New Jersey Special Education Code. It's definitely a go-to document that Laura uses particularly. And there's, it's a lot of legal stuff in there, but it really does spell out what you're entitled to do. In here, it will show you that, the definition dyslexia was put into the education code. That was another one of our dyslexia laws that we passed in 2013. And so as I say, it's in there. So this is definitely a document you want to have, bookmarked so that you can go back to it. It's a lot of pages, may not want to print it out, but definitely be able to find it, save it. You can flag it save it to your download to your computer as well. This is
let me share my love for the New Jersey State Code. If you want to go back, that so little of it actually applies to anyone's situation at any one time. So if you're in the evaluation stage or reevaluation, as you see on the screen, that it's only a couple of pages that you'll probably ever deal with at one time. And of the, I think it's 8 or 9 subchapters total, that you really only need about 3 of them, that it's services, it's programs and instruction. So if you're wondering how this is supposed to work, that the process, the prize is a great short version of what you're dealing with in special education, that when you're ready for the longer version, you want to come to the code. It's not very dense. Some of these things are very subjective, that when we come to words like appropriate, right? What is appropriate for our child? Getting agreement with the team, things like that. So there's actually very little of the code that, again, you'll deal with at any one time. So it's a great thing to go to when you have a meeting coming up, that if you're anticipating maybe a little pushback on trying to get things in the present levels, that it tells you that that should be there per the code. And again, you might want to download this to your computer. If you save it on a flash drive, that you can go print out particular pages. If you don't have a great printer at home, they go to Staples, make yourself a copy, and you'll find that you can put a lot of Post-its in there, things you want to note as your situation changes, as you go through the year and years of school with an IEP.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and this is the Department of Ed, their special education page. So you'll see they have a lot of things on here that you can, tap into, and you should be familiar with, so you know where to find things as well. They have a dyslexia page too, which has the, spells out some of the laws and the New Jersey laws that we had passed. So have your resources and make sure you know where to find them when you need them.
Liz did just post the link from that page to the New Jersey Special Education Ombudsman. For anyone who is not familiar, that there is a person who is the Ombudsman, and that person was created by New Jersey Code, that position rather, and there is a department around that. That this is meant to be a resource, not just for parents, but school as well. So if you are uncertain of the law or how you're interpreting that state code, that what you can do, if you're having a disagreement and you'd really rather try to work through that rather than filing for mediation or filing a complaint, that the Ombudsman, an email, a phone number, it's all right there, can be a good stop to find out whether you're working with good information, whether your team is telling you the right thing or not. And hopefully that it was created to help head off a lot of the disagreements that lead to do process filings.
Very good. So that, kind of wraps it up for us. Like I said, if you want to get in touch with Lori and myself, do the info@decodingdyslexia-NJ.org. Our website is similarly named, so just decodingdyslexia-NJ.org, and you'll find us. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Facebook is probably our most active location, and you'll get a lot of good information from there. So we encourage you. We do also have a monthly newsletter, and if you email us, we can get you on the newsletter. Or if you'd like to attend our monthly meetings, they are virtual the last Wednesday of every month. So the next Wednesday, the 27th, is our next one, and we welcome all visitors. So if you're interested in joining our meeting, it runs from 7:30 until 9. So again, email us, and I'll add you on the attendee list. Okay. Is there anything else out there? I see one more chat. I don't know if that's one of our attendees or internal thing on there.
I don't. The chat's clear.
Okay. Well, very good. So I guess that's about it. Thank you to the Lacey Library for having us in to do a presentation, and maybe sometime in the future we'll be able to do one in person again. So
we hope to do it in person. Thank you again for joining us today, and thank you to Liz and Lori and Decoding Dyslexia New Jersey for sharing your knowledge and wealth of information. Again, be sure to check them out on Monday, October 25th at 6:30, when they're going to do another virtual event about how to talk about your dyslexia. So
right, yeah, that's the Toms River Library in Ocean County also we're doing for that, and it's how do you talk about your dyslexia. And we have a panel. It's a panel discussion. There will be a parent, will be myself. We have a Orton Gillingham tutor, and we have a young woman that's in her 20s that's dyslexic, and then we have a brother and sister team, an 8th grader and 11th grader. So we're all going to be talking about how we talk about dyslexia with our families, and the kids will be talking about how they learn to kind of own the dyslexia, and how they live with it, but not necessarily have it define who they are.
Excellent. So again, be sure to check that out on Monday, on the 25th at 6:30, and look forward to our YouTube channel for this recording and other videos as well. And I think that's about it. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.